Shabbat Shalom. I don't know if this is actually true, but I believe it. There was a discount airline that for years would not run red-eye flights because their software could not handle the idea of a flight that took off on one day and landed on another. Even though that is in fact what many of their flights ended up doing. On our secular calendar, by which our industrial world works, there is a very clear divider of when, for legal purposes, one day begins and another one ends. The clock ticks over 11:59 p.m., and then it is the next day. Midnight is the clear dividing line between one day and the next. And so our technology, our legal system in the civil world is all based on that premise. And the truth is, most of the things that we do in the world sort of work on that basis. So for example, July 4th happens on July 4th. Nothing special July 3rd. Now, New Year's Eve and Christmas Eve are a little bit different, but by the way you celebrate New Year's Eve is not the way you celebrate New Year's Day, right? No one has brunch on the morning of December 31st, right? No one is blowing noisemakers and kissing at 11:59 on January 1st. In Judaism, it works a little bit differently. So those of you who are connoisseurs of the Jewish calendar understand that the day actually flips, that we actually begin a new Jewish day on the calendar around sundown. And what I want to do with you today is actually show you that that is not as straightforward as you might think, and that how you choose when the day begins and ends actually says a lot about your philosophical approach to the world and to life. So in Genesis, the very first thing God does is create light, and then it says, Vayi Erev, Vayi Boker. It was evening, it was morning, it was the first day. And so there are a lot of questions that verse raises. So like, how do you even define a day if you don't have the sun, right? What was that light even? And so the mystics say it was the real light of God that illuminated the universe, and the light that we have from the sun is a lesser light of a lower spiritual level, but we are seeking to return to that greater level of light. But when you read the verse, Vayi Erev Vayi Boker, Yom Echad, Vayi Erev Vayi Boker Yom Sheni, it was the evening, it was morning, it was one day, it was 2 days. That verse is actually ambiguous. So in fact, there was an important medieval commentator, Rabbi Shimon ben Meir, Rashbam, who was a grandchild of Rashi, who was the most famous of biblical commentators. And he lived in the 12th century, he passed away in 1158. And he wrote, commenting on that verse, light always precedes darkness. Vayi Erev, Vayi Boker. The Bible does not say Vayi Laila, it was night and then it was day, because what happened was the first day turned to evening and the light vanished. So then when the dawn broke and morning followed night, the first day was completed and the second day began. So in essence, what Rashbam says is that the day starts with the morning light. That is when the day starts. And then it is nighttime, and then the next day starts at the next dawn. And in fact, if you read the verses of Genesis, it is actually a logical conclusion you can draw. And the truth is, for most of us, that is how we think about days. We think about the day beginning when we wake up, right? Because, right, when the clock strikes midnight and I sit down to start answering my email, right, that is not the beginning of a new day. That is still the end of the old day, right? Cognitively, for most of us, when we say tomorrow, we are not talking about 1 a.m. later that night. We are talking about when we get up the next day, God willing. And you actually see that even in our Torah portion this week with the sacrifices, because the Torah portion actually says that Passover is on the 14th of Nisan, Ben Ha'arbaim, in the evenings, is when you bring the Paschal lamb, and the 15th is a different holiday, Chag HaMatzot, the festival of matzah. So a plain reading of our portion this week would indicate that actually the time when we are sitting down to Seder, the time when Passover starts is actually still the 14th of Nisan, and the 15th is really the next day. And if you're really a connoisseur of Leviticus, this question of the night following the day versus the day following the night also comes up because many of the sacrifices are brought during the day and can be eaten through the next night, the Paschal lamb being one. So there is actually a lot of evidence, if you want to read carefully in the Torah, that maybe the day starts at dawn, the day is the beginning of the daytime is the beginning of the day, and then the nighttime is the end of the day, and the next dawn is beginning of a new day. However, that is not the way Judaism decided to go. So there is a contemporary of Rashbam named Ibn Ezra, who is a hyper-rationalist and a grammarian to boot, so he was a lot of fun at parties. And although in a move that was uncharacteristic of him, he reports in one of his books that he actually had a dream in which Shabbat personified came to him and told him that he had to reject Rashbam's view. That's the weirdest dream ever, right? I don't know what you have to eat to have a dream that Shabbat comes to you and tells you have to write a book. And so he writes in 1154, I awoke in great fright. I took my books and went outside to read them in the moonlight. And behold, I saw that Rashbam had written that the first day ended with the dawn because night follows day. I almost tore my clothes in mourning, and I actually tore up the book and vowed that I would not sleep a wink once Shabbat was over before I wrote an epistle of my own to explain the matter of the commencement of the day in the Torah. So basically, Ibn Ezra has the experience of, I cannot let this Facebook or Instagram post go. I cannot sleep until I have responded, because all major debates are resolved by an appropriately intelligent comment in response on the internet. So in fact, Ibn Ezra does go on. He never actually writes the epistle. He actually does write the epistle, I take it back. But he makes his argument as to why Rashbam is wrong, and it is not that the day starts with the dawn, but rather the day starts in the evening, with actually a verse from our parasha, a verse from our portion this week, which talks about Yom Kippur. We read today, Ach be'asor lachodesh, on the 10th of the month, that will be a holy day. It is Yom Kippur, and you should afflict your souls and bring an offering to God, right? That is Yom Kippur, the 10th of the month. So far, checks out. It says, Shabbat Shabbaton hu lachem, it shall be a day of complete rest for you, the Sabbath of Sabbaths. You shall practice self-denial. And here's where it gets tricky. B'tish'ah lachodesh ba'erev. From the 9th day of the month in the evening, me'erev ad erev tishbetu Shabbatchem. From the evening to the evening, you shall observe your festive days. So the halakha, the Jewish law, looks at this verse and says, well, clearly, the Torah says, observe your festivals from the evening to the evening. Rashbam says, yes, but it says from the 9th in the evening. So by saying that it's the evening of the 9th and not the evening of the 10th, you're conceding my point, because you're acknowledging that Yom Kippur actually starts on the 9th, right, which means that sundown is still part of the previous day. This is a little dense, but bear with me. And so therefore, the Torah seems to be saying that Kol Nidre Eve, right, the eve of Yom Kippur, is Yom Kippur, but it is actually technically the 9th day of the month still, not the 10th. And so the way this fight actually worked out is that the consensus of the sages was that the Jewish day does start at night. And so therefore, right, Shabbat starts in the evening and ends in the evening. When I am writing a ketubah, a marriage contract, and the wedding is taking place on Saturday night after dark, because you're not supposed to get married on Shabbat, right? The ketubah says on the first day of the week, as far as we are concerned legally, once it is Shabbat is over, it is actually now Sunday from a legal perspective, right? Once the sun has set on Friday, it is now Shabbat, it is now the 7th day of the week, it is no longer the 6th. Same thing, right? If you have a yahrzeit on a particular day, it begins the night before, and if you show up after sundown the next day, you are late. Now, there's a little bit of a wrinkle here, which is Erev means evening, but that time is not well defined. So is evening when the sun literally goes below the horizon? Is it when it is really dark out? And how dark is it, right? Is it dark enough that you can see the stars? Is it dark enough that you need a flashlight, right? How dark is dark? And so in fact, we, belt and suspenders, we actually say we are going to take the strictest view. When we are observing a holiday, we start with the sundown, and my alarm is going off. We start with sundown, and we end with dark. So our holidays actually last 25 hours, and sometimes that's just the sermon. And in fact, a little bit of trivia, that time in between sundown and dark is actually a little bit of both. So a little bit of fun trivia. You can actually have a situation where 3 babies are born within 70 minutes of each other, but their brisses are on 3 different days. So if a baby is born on Friday afternoon before sundown, well, then the bris is on the next Friday. If the baby is born after dark and the baby is born on Shabbat, the bris, assuming certain other criteria are met, takes place the next Shabbat. But if the baby is born in between, in that magic hour between sundown and dark, when it's kind of part of both days, the rabbis kind of throw up their hands and say, we don't know which day it is, and you're not supposed to have a bris on Shabbat unless it's really supposed to be on Shabbat. So just to be safe, we're going to push it off to the next Sunday. So you can now pass the JTS final exam of 1999. But the key is that now perhaps you understand why it is that the Jewish day starts at night, and it's based on this verse in our portion. I want to offer perhaps a more philosophical takeaway to this debate, right? Because we can say that the day follows the night follows the day. When do we say that something begins? When do we say it ends? Now, the rabbis heard Rashbam's complaint about, well, it says from the 9th is when Yom Kippur starts, and they said, that's not what it means. In fact, it is a mitzvah to extend the holiday earlier into when it is still daylight. And in fact, that is why we light our Shabbat candles 18 minutes before sundown. We actually add a little bit of light onto Shabbat. And then at the end of Shabbat, we don't end at the first possible moment. We actually wait a few moments. We wait later than is absolutely necessary so that we are not in a rush to take our leave of Shabbat. But here's really the philosophical question that this whole debate leaves you with, even if you are not so excited by the question of when holidays stop and start, which is the question of, do we see life as going from darkness to light or light to darkness? So if you follow sort of the American view of midnight to midnight, so we begin in darkness, we have a period of light, and then we end again in darkness. Rashbam's view, right, that sort of you begin with light and you end with dark is a little bit of a downer. I like the view that we start with darkness, but we end in light. And not only that, but we add a little bit of light at the beginning. And not only that, but when we end Shabbat or we end a holiday, we have Havdalah, we kindle our own light. When it is dark, we don't wait for the sun to come up again. We actually light a candle, we smell the spices, and we say we are bringing light even when the sun has left us. And so as we observe Shabbat, as we observe Jewish holidays, or even if you are not of the Jewish faith, as you go through life, you can think about whether you are living on a journey from darkness to light or from light to darkness, and think about how you add moments of light. How do you extend a time to bring more light into it? And so in these days, as in so many others, it is not a small thing to say that we are going from darkness to light. It is not a small thing to say that we are bringing a little bit of extra light into our darkness. And that is what makes our days worthy of celebration. Shabbat Shalom.